On the day after Lydia and George were married, Nellie took it upon herself to visit the newlyweds with the message of prophecy. Lydia, she claimed, was not long for this world. She went on to explain that Lydia would fall pregnant and give birth to just one child before an untimely death would take her, just as it had happened to herself. And with the prophecy delivered, the cellar of the Blaisdell home fell quiet for a while. But not the voices of the local dissenters, who still whispered about Nellie. Was she a twisted scheme devised to ensnare George Butler to Lydia, or was she a demonic presence? Rumours floated through the wooded hills and farmlands of Hancock County and showed little sign of slowing. After a 63-day absence, the ghostly activity launched into overdrive. On at least 29 occasions in August of 1800, she was witnessed by over 100 people. Always the ghost would invite the witnesses into the cellar. Abner Blaisdell would blow out the candlelight, plunging the room into darkness, and the visitation would commence, opening as it always did with a series of knocks from Nellie Butler to announce her arrival. During these visitations, she was not always visible to everyone in the room at the same time. At times she never appeared at all. On others she appeared only to a select few, whilst others standing mere feet away saw nothing. She always appeared wearing a glowing white dress or shroud. At times she wore a cap, and others not. Sometimes she was seen cradling the body of her dead baby in her arms. Her visage was described by Mary Gordon in her later testimony. At first, the apparition was a mere mass of light, then grew into a personal form, about as tall as myself. We stood in two ranks about 4 or 5 feet apart. Between these ranks she slowly passed and repassed, so that any of us could have handled her. When she passed by me, her nearness was that of contact, so that if there had been a substance, I should have certainly felt it. The glow of the apparition had a constant, tremulous motion. Her voice would flitter across the room, instantaneously moving from a distance 10 or 12 feet from the spectators, at others leaning into their ears and speaking next to their heads. All of this carry-on invited many skeptics. Some professed that the voice of the spirit was merely the voice of Lydia Blaisdell. However, Nellie addressed this directly by sending Lydia away in front of these skeptical inquirers. About 14 persons, by the direction of the spectre, went into the cellar. As soon as they were there, the spectre said to Lydia Blaisdell, "Go up and sit with others on the kitchen hearth, that this company may know that it is not you who speaks." After she was gone up, the ghost conversed with the company on several topics suited to authenticate her mission. Likewise, Nellie spoke of her past life to others in an attempt to win over their belief. She mentioned several incidents of her past life, known only to her husband as he declared, and asked him if he remembered them. He said yes. She asked him if he had told them. He answered no. And of such a nature were these incidents as to render it utterly improbable that he ever should have mentioned them before. She told Abner Blaisdell that his father, who was sick, was in heaven praising God with the angels. In fact, he had died 7 days prior, unbeknown to Abner at the time, and later confirmed by his family in York that they had yet to send the news at all. She routinely invited people to stand as near as they pleased to her, to handle her if they wished, and to not be afraid, and to ask as many questions as they liked concerning her past life, apparently responding to them all with satisfactory answers. The hauntings had reached a boiling point by mid-August. As more and more people crowded into the cellar to speak with Nellie, more too spoke in hushed tones of the devilry from the Blaisdell basement. As if to counter all this talk in the town of her spirit visitations being the work of the devil or demonic witchcraft, now threatening to overshadow the events taking place there themselves, Nellie began preaching more and more on religious topics, confirming to onlookers that they were safe in her presence and had nothing to fear. On the 1st of August, when witness Paul Simpson asked her if she loved Christ, she replied, "Yes, I do," and began singing Alleluias. This was a practice that she now maintained. When on the 7th of August, Sarah Simpson asked her if she came from happiness or misery, she replied, "I am from above and am come on God's message," breaking out in a chorus of more Alleluias. On the 4th of August, she addressed the topic directly with Thomas Aran. a sceptical local who had proclaimed to many around town that the spirit was the work of the devil. "You have often said that I am a devil or a witch," she said whilst addressing him. "I am from above, praising God and the Lamb." By the night of August the 9th, things were getting a little rough down in the Blaisdell basement. A large crowd had gathered, and many of them sought to confirm their belief that a fraud was being played out by the Blaisdell family. There was a lot of pushing and shoving, and several people took it upon themselves to impersonate the familiar knockings of Nellie Butler. This eventually led to the undesirable elements of the crowd being removed from the situation by Abner Blaisdell. Paul Simpson Jr. was one such skeptic who had left disappointed after seeing the scenes that night. As he walked home, however, he decided that his feeling of dissatisfaction would not dissipate unless he could uncover the deception. He returned to the farmhouse, and once allowed into the cellar by Abner, was invited to light a candle and search until his heart's content. He gave the following account of his investigation. "I came out last and was careful and watched, so that I was sure that no person went down. Also, the door was fast. Then again, we heard the sound of knocking. It was addressed and conversation followed, in the midst of which Abner Blaisdell said to me, 'If you think any living person talks, go forward and grasp that person.' I went forward a few steps, but was so convinced that nobody was there that I consider all further attempts as useless." He then saw the apparition of Nellie Butler and described it in a fairly interesting manner. "I saw the apparition at first about 2 feet in height, but as it drew nearer to me, it appeared as tall as a person. I saw this appearance passing close by me, and from 5 or 6 times. At last it diminished to about 1 foot in height and then vanished." By mid-August, things had finally reached a head, and the people of Franklin and Sullivan were no longer speaking quietly. Divisions sprang as different sides of the argument as to the veracity of the events were now outwardly spoken of, and the events in the Blaisdell cellar were the talk of the town. On the night of the 13th to 14th of August, 47 people gathered to see the spirit of Nellie Butler. Never one to let the people down, Nellie had something special arranged for the masses. She sought to end the voices of dissent once and for all. At 1 o'clock in the morning, she commanded the congregation to march to a neighbouring house belonging to one of the loudest skeptics in the village, James Miller. The walk covered 2 miles, and on the journey, the group was ordered to file side by side, in groups of 2, singing the 84th Psalm as they walked. Nellie assured them that she would follow behind the group as they walked. Several witnesses claimed to have seen her walking with them as they marched through the night, whilst others saw nothing. When they reached James Miller's house, the crowd squeezed in through his front door, whilst Paul Blaisdell asked him if he would take him down to his cellar. Miller complied, and when he stood below the ground, the voice of Nellie Butler rang out around him. "I have come to let you know that I can speak in this cellar as well as in the other. Are you convinced?" Apparently, he was, as he too joined the group now gathering outside his house awaiting the reappearance of Nellie. Once she appeared, the spirit then commanded them to continue marching. She would walk alongside Lydia Blaisdell at the head of the parade, Lydia shrouded in a black cloak. This, the spirit remarked, would finally put an end to the dissenting talk that Lydia was herself behind a nefarious scheme of deception or witchcraft. They then turned back to the Blaisdell farmhouse where the bizarre march was to end. Several people, including many of the skeptical, testified to seeing Lydia walk alongside the spirit singing a hymn as they shuffled along. Following the parade, things began to settle down on Blaisdell Farm, but not before the ghost of Nellie Butler would command one last act. She ordered for her deceased child to be dug up and reburied closer to her own grave on Butler Point to enable them both to rise up to heaven together on Judgment Day. Over 80 people from 4 different towns gathered on the hillside to bear witness to the solemn affair, as the remains of the newborn were moved 30 feet up Butler's Point to be reinterred next to the remains of Nellie Butler. For the most part, this ended the visitations for good. There was to be just one final twist. Throughout, and despite all of the strange happenings of August and the following reinterment of Nellie's newborn child in the autumn, Lydia and George had settled into their married life. They had moved in together and lived on Butler's Point in Franklin, and Lydia had fallen pregnant with their first child, who was expected in March of 1801. The childbirth was not an easy one, and just as the ghost of Nellie Butler had prophesied 10 months previously, neither Lydia nor the baby survived the ordeal. Both were buried alongside Nellie and her child on Butler's Point. Shortly after her death, George Butler placed all of her belongings into a boat, and floating it from Butler's Point, he set it ablaze. As it was pulled by the tides out across the bay, it unfortunately sailed directly past the Blaisdell farm, who saw the move by George as an affront on their daughter. George, they assumed, was cutting all ties with the memories of his deceased wife. This rift would continue, with Abner never forgiving George, and eventually led to the splitting of the local church 16 years later, following an investigation into the matter, with members siding with both Abner and George. George went on to remarry for a third time to a woman named Mary Googins, and the couple had 4 children together. Nellie appeared only once more, and it was to the wandering evangelist Abraham Cummings. He had not been around for much of the events of the hauntings, though he had witnessed a voice speaking in January of 1800, but he left feeling unimpressed. Upon his return to Sullivan, however, he had found the situation irresistible. During the remainder of the haunting, he had collected all of the eyewitness testimonies of the local people. He then published all of these testimonies, along with a collection of relevant letters in a work that detailed the events surrounding Sullivan and Franklin and the haunting of Nellie Butler. In 1806, he had been alerted by 2 men that the spectre had been seen outside his house in the fields, and going out to see for himself, he wrote of what he saw. Looking toward an eminence 12 rods distance from the house, I saw there, as I supposed, one of the white rocks. This confirmed my opinion on their spectre, and I paid no more attention to it. 3 minutes after, I accidentally looked in the same direction, and the white rock was in the air, its form a complete globe, white with a tincture of red like the damask rose, and its diameter about 2 feet. While my eye was constantly upon it, I went on 4 or 5 steps, when it came to me from the distance of 11 rods as quick as lightning, and instantly assumed a personal form with a female dress. I went into the house and gave the information, not doubting that she had come to spend some time with us as she had before. We went out to see her again, but to my great disappointment, she had vanished. The Nellie Butler haunting is a complicated event with many social and religious threads. Proponents and believers cited how she appeared in both the day and night times, in the Blaisdell cellar, in open fields, and in 4 other houses around Franklin. The house of James Miller half a mile away, as well as of Sarah and Samuel Simpson, Josiah Simpson and Abraham Cummings 1, 3 and 5 miles away. They mention all the time she openly invited people to approach her, to touch her and feel for themselves. How at times she appeared for some and not others, though they stood alongside one another in that dimly lit cellar. It's fairly easy to point fingers towards Lydia. However, how would Lydia have known the vast amount of information needed to answer so many questions concerning Nellie Butler's life, some of which was extremely personal and intimate? And why would she order the reinterment of the child on Butler's Point? On the other hand, dissenting voices find it all too easy to highlight the marriage as a key factor in a hoax designed to hoodwink the fathers into allowing a forbidden relationship. The travelling evangelist Abraham Cummings was probably the spirit's greatest sympathiser, and he took it upon himself to carefully document and transcribe the entire affair. However, one has to be aware of the religious perspective of the time. Cummings would have been evangelising in an age when materialism was rampant. For him, collecting the eyewitness accounts of the Nellie Butler haunting and publishing them would have been an effort to back up his religious agenda and to counter the arguments that there was no immortal soul. In the end, we are left with nothing but circumstantial evidence for either side. Despite this, it remains a fascinating tale, and one that could well be the true origin for spiritualism in North America, preceding the accepted norm by over 50 years. The truth of the matter will remain a mystery. Jeremiah Bunker, one of the strongest sceptical voices at the time of the hauntings, said of the ghost of Nellie Butler, "I thought then, and ever since, that the whole was a deception, for I cannot see how there could be such a clear personal shape where no living person was."